Hi and welcome to Express Sports Podcast. You're listening to Game Time with me, Mihir Vasavda, and joining me as always is Amit Kamath. And continuing from where we left off last week, we'll be talking about the recently concluded World Chess Championship, and thankfully, it won't be me and Amit who'll be doing all the talking because, well, we were privileged to get an audience of the man who perhaps is best placed, best suited to talk about chess and all things chess. Amit, we did meet five-time world champion Vishwanathan Anand. It just was a good coincidence that he happened to be in Bombay days after the World Chess Championship, and it turned out to be a nice half hour or so chat on multiple issues.
Yeah, absolutely, Mir. Every time you get to pick the brains of somebody like a Vishy Anand, it's a delight in itself. You take away much more than you came into the conversation with. So Vishy is somebody who's obviously everybody knows that he's a five-time champion, but then he's also currently a mentor to some of the brightest Indian chess players, an entire crop of chess players who are now training at his academy. He's also the vice president of the global governing body of the sport, FIDE. So he's somebody who's seen the sport from the top, and even now he's at a very great vantage point of sorts, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why perhaps makes for a perfect man to talk about it. So we've broadly spoken about three issues. One, of course, is the young crop of Indian chess players and what the future holds for them. Then, of course, the current recently concluded, not the current World Championship match between Ding Liren and Ian Nepomniachtchi. And one of the things that's always associated with this particular World Championship match, because the previous world champion, Magnus Carlsen, opted out of it. And that is a very rare event in chess. So we've spoken to him about that. And also about the rule changes, the possible rule changes in chess, and his overall experience as a commentator. Lots to unpack in this half hour of conversation with Anand, and I think we'll leave you guys with it rather than me and Amit going on and on about it. I hope you guys enjoy listening to it as much as we enjoyed talking to him.
So we just hope to understand, after you became a world champion, since then we've had lots of grandmasters, but not too many Indians have actually contended for the world championship, the finals, or even been in the candidates. So why do you think that is?
Well, it takes time. First of all, they start out as juniors and they have to go to colleges. We are in a good place now. There are maybe 3 or 4 juniors who could, well, I call them juniors because still under 19 or 19, but many of them are super GMs. So they have a very realistic shot at playing the candidates, which is the first stage. Then it's a huge ask that they qualify right in the first cycle, but not impossible. So this time is quite exciting. Gukesh is very close, and we have a talented group which are all getting ready to try to qualify with candidates. And if not this cycle, then at least the next cycle, I think we'll be ready.
But who do you think is most ready, if you can pick out a player? Because as you said, there is a talented bunch of super GMs, but who are also very young. So who would you say is the most ready of the whole lot?
It's difficult to say because it changes, form varies and so on. But right now, Gukesh is kind of standing out in the sense that he's maybe 25 points above the others, and Gukesh standing out, but it's a very competitive group.
Okay, so Gukesh is about 16 years old, but when you were that age, what was the most important next step for you? I mean, what do you think these guys should be doing right now so that if not the next World Championship, they'll be ready for the one in 27?
It's just a thing of you play the big events, you get used to that because there's only so much you can train. They've gotten to the stage where they're very strong, but everyone from now on is very strong. And you need to just get better in crunch situation, in critical moments. And that's something you can only get with experience. And now is the time to go through it. For instance, I qualified for the candidates my very first cycle, but then it took me 3 whole cycles to win the title. So everyone has a lag in a certain way, but they're training, they're getting stronger. And in fact, I would say right now, if they can maintain their level, that itself is an accomplishment because it's a very, very competitive stage. and keep working, keep training.
All right, so if we were to move on to the recently concluded World Championship, Ding Liren finally became a world champion. But why do you think it took China so long to get a male world champion?
They've actually done better with the women and earlier. Their men's team is very strong. For instance, they won the Chess Olympiad various times. So as a team, they're very, very good. But a couple of them have stagnated. So they had some very talented players, Wei Yi, Yu Yang, and so on. But really, Ding was the one they were waiting for. And then he lost some time due to the pandemic, but luckily, this cycle he qualified. And even that was quite a miracle, as you know, the details. He was not in the candidates. Then, thanks to the Russia-Ukraine war and Karyakin getting banned, there was a spot, but he still had to jump hoops to get into it. Then Carlsen had to withdraw for him to, and then he got lucky with Nakamura in the last round, and it looked like somebody was up there pulling string. And so, but since he's been number 2 or 3 in the world for the last 4 or 5 years, most people acknowledge him as, one of the most realistic challengers. Maybe now they will have an impetus again, some growth in China, and then more and more talents will come. But I would say that for the last 5 or 6 years, he's been the only one at the absolute top.
In fact, that's what we were coming to, because we've seen China in other sports, when they have one world champion, they seem to produce a factory of world champions. We've seen it in so many other sports. But do you think that will happen in chess? Because they don't seem to be having anyone in the pipeline coming up.
It's difficult to say. They have lots of talented youngsters, but so does India and so do other countries. The US actually has a very competitive youth team and so on. So maybe chess is much more crowded in that stage. And so that's another factor.
Right. So obviously now when you look at Magnus Carlsen, who seems to be indicating at least that he's not too interested, or motivated to actually play in the World Chess Championship. But back then when you were playing, did it kind of feel like, playing chess was the only thing? If you decided to become a professional chess player, you didn't have like a fallback option. Like right now, if you look at players, like you have Ali Raza, who has his fashion business apparently. There are other players who are doing a lot of streaming. There are players who are doing a lot of YouTube analysis. People have their Chessable courses. But coming back to your era, was it like playing well on the board was the only way you could even be sustainable as a chess player?
There were always alternate careers. It's true that now some new ones have appeared, like the ones you mentioned. I don't know if Ali Reza actually has a fashion business or he's studying it, but certainly YouTube and streaming is an option. But again, these are not comparable. If you have the dream to become world champion, then that is one thing that you try to do on your own. I don't think people try to become world champion because they couldn't find some other option. In that sense, it was a goal that few could aspire to, and then even those few were pruned much further. But I think Magnus brings... One of the things that affected Magnus was clearly the nature of modern opening preparation with computers, and he alluded to this as a reason. So he suddenly lost the motivation. But having won 5 times, it's understandable also. And but in fact, the scene is then more exciting because we saw that Ding Nepomniachtchi was the most exciting match we could remember in ages. And possibly that's because they went at each other with gusto. And the World Championship may actually have a fresh lease of life, which is that everyone who plays really wants to play and really wants to give it their best. And so that may actually make the World Championship a much more interesting event than it's been for a while.
You mentioned the openings, right? But do you think the Ding Nepo World Championship match also kind of showed that you don't really need a strong opening to end up as a winner?
I would hesitate to go that far. Well, you could see how risky it was for both players. And they were pushing the thing. But it's clear that in the modern context, this is how you try to unbalance the position. Because if you just wanted to prepare everything for equality, it's very easy to do so. But now surprise value, that's what they're looking for. One match doesn't make a trend. So I'm very keen to see what the next match will be like. But hopefully they can, this will give a fresh lease of life to the World Championship cycle. Because there's so many others who would deserve a shot. Hikaru, that it's not clear how we might try again. Anish, let's say. Kapor, Duda, No, if I wasn't tempted 3 years earlier, why am I going to be tempted now? No, this is clear. But there are lots of people who now have one shot, and maybe that's a good thing.
Speaking as a super GM or somebody who's won the world championship 5 times and challenged for it multiple more times, and not as a FIDE deputy president, do you see any changes that the format of the world championship maybe requires?
We were already discussing possible changes. The thing is, once you've started a cycle, you don't want to change the rules midway through the cycle. So that's one limiting factor. But it's not inconceivable that we make some changes. Obviously, not for the next one, because that's going to start very soon, but the one after that. So not 24, but then either 26. Then 26 becomes a very realistic possibility to make some changes or beyond. But let's see also what 24 is like.
So what kind of changes are you considering?
They could be in the format, more formats, more variety, because you don't want to switch over to rapid and blitz completely. But at the same time, the question is, can you bring a little bit of that in? Those along the lines of the ideas that were proposed. It's not like any consensus was reached, because it's very easy to say you want to change the system. That's a statement that people generally agree with. But then you ask them to nail down what exactly they want to change, and everybody suddenly says, well, I'm not so sure. I think that's the problem we are facing in chess also. Given that we have this very valuable tradition, the World Championship, and it's really a tradition going back all the way, essentially boils down to, why would you want Wimbledon on some new astro surface? You want it on grass, tradition. It's the same argument once you have this thing. And second, there are other tournaments for every other format. So it'll be tricky to make that change. I think at the moment when it comes to make that change, we'll hesitate because we're tinkering with something. But it could be discussed later.
Right, of course. But you also mentioned the hesitation. Is it because that, in the classical World Chess Championship, to have rapid or blitz events actually deciding the classical world champion, is that what the bone of contention?
No, that got accepted very fast, because remember what was the past. First, when they tied in the past, the champion retained his title. And going back before that, the champion had a rematch clause built in. So first the rematch clause had to go, then the retain the title clause went, and then you come to a fair system. Look, you've had enough time to prove the difference in the classical format. Now the tiebreak will happen in the faster format. That made sense. Yeah. And so I don't think that was a problem anymore. And in fact, this is much fairer. Most people now say this is, of course, much fairer than giving them rematches and all what we had in the 50s.
But fairer in what sense?
It's fairer that both sides, if you give the champion draw odds, then there's a 1 point lead in a sense in the modern context. So why would you give someone a 1 point lead to start with? So it's better to have a tiebreaker. It's fairer, and so that's.
I mean, there seems to be this umbilical cord between chess and Magnus Carlsen, and there's still some obsession with him. Even if he's not there at a tournament, people don't seem to be tiring talking about him. How do you look at that? I mean, does that affect the credibility of a world championship match? And do you think that's fair on either Nepo or Ding?
Well, first of all, it's clear that when you have such a great and dominant champion, that people will mention him. I mean, Fischer was being mentioned decades later. I mean, the Fischer haunted us for many decades. People will still keep saying, but what about Bobby and Bobby? So that is normal.
Did it bother you about Fischer? Did it bother you, irritate you?
I think this match has gone a long way to justifying both the players and the format. I mean, if you have such excitement, then it's clear that everyone was in love with this match because of how exciting it was and how much fun it was. I don't see a problem in that. There's always going to be some noise, and basically everyone who has an opinion one way or the other has more or less expressed it. That's going to keep coming, but I don't see it as a serious barrier.
You spoke of the excitement during the World Chess Championship. I don't actually ever remember you live tweeting through a chess event as much as you were doing during the recently concluded World Championship. Was that also an indicator that you were so excited that you were actually on Twitter the whole time tweeting? Because, I mean, yes, the first 4 matches of the World Championship, you were supposed to do commentary. Then you got done with that. And game 5 onwards, we saw you constantly on Twitter tweeting about it. So, can you just talk to us a little bit about your own excitement levels from game 5 onwards?
It was a very gripping match because you had the feeling that even when the openings kind of fizzled out, that something interesting will happen because they were both playing very interesting fighting chess. And the tweeting arose, I just thought, I did commentary already, why not tweet something? It seemed like something I could do from home without tweeting. And I didn't set out to tweet so much. My initial thing was I'll put in an interesting moment or two and leave it at that. But then the match got so captivating, I joined in. I might do it, but it just seemed like fun to do, and I did it. It seemed a way to keep with the match, but at the same time, be back home. I didn't want to spend the whole match commentating, and I guess I got sucked into it.
I think at some point, Irina and Daniel Dubov, we saw them from game 5 onwards actually asking you to tweet a little more, and then you would inevitably, in some time, tweet.
It got completely ridiculous where I would tweet something while watching them, and then I'd hear them watching, telling me, "Can you tweet some more?" And we became a sort of an ecosystem. So it was very funny. I also didn't want to reply too soon because I didn't want to look that jobless. And I'm sitting at home waiting for them to say, "Yes, Irina. Yes, Danny." Boom, boom, boom. So it was slightly awkward, but also very funny.
You seem to be talking about your commentary experience very fondly, and you said that you'd like to do that a lot more. But when you look at all these new generation of players who are on Twitch, who are presenting chess to the world in a very different way, is that something that interests you in terms of getting into streaming or just connecting with the viewers in a very different way?
Haven't made specific plans in that direction. I mean, once in a while, I think what it would be like, but I would have to think about whether the time commitment and all that would work.
I ask because just thinking aloud in terms of the ways to make chess more appealing to a larger audience beyond the traditional chess base.
Definitely, it's an interesting idea, and you can see it quite naturally because I've already done commentary in several places. Yeah, and this is just it's just doing commentary from your own studio in a sense. It becomes like that. It could start very easily, and maybe somebody will convince me, and then I'll go very fast. At the moment, it's pending because I've got to be in FIDE as deputy president. I'm doing the Westbridge Academy. So a couple of projects. I haven't done it yet. Who knows?
Just going to ask you about your FIDE role. You've come in at a very interesting time, geopolitically speaking. How has that been, balancing everything as an administrator? How do you approach the sport in terms of planning things, getting it done?
It's not only the difference between a player and an administrator. I would say it's also... We have come to an interesting time where chess has suddenly found this new avenue on streaming and social media, and everything is very fast-paced, and everything becomes controversial very fast and then drops out very fast. And so you've got a bit of that. At the same time, it's very exciting because the numbers in chess are very, very good. Very big audiences, record audiences for the World Championship, for candidates tournaments, for everything. And so it's exciting as well. We're trying to popularize the sport more in specific areas. So women's chess is an area of focus. Youth programs are always there, but obviously we'd want to continue any momentum we have there. Now we're going to be an Olympic esport. So there are, at the same time, so many doors are opening. It's an exciting time. And for me, it's just a very fascinating experience. I mean, for me, FIDE was a little bit like the plumbing. It was happening in the background and the matches happened, but it's the first time you see that there's all these people involved in making something happening, and you see it for the first time from inside. And that's also interesting. But I mean, they seem to enjoy having my perspective as a player and back and forth. But it's been fun. I get to see it from the inside.
So I also wanted to understand from you, the way classical chess is played, has that evolved since the time you were an active player? Has that changed in any way?
Yes. Basically, the dominant thing was computers and computer preparation. That's the dominant influence on chess. But the good side of that is, so it wasn't only negative, the good side is also that audiences are much bigger. People are able to follow it. You get good explanations online, you can think. So the sport has also grown because we have essentially so many TV channels going around. And so probably as a ratio of how much it was, classical chess must have dropped from whatever, 80, 90% to closer to 40%. I have no specific numbers, but the ratio has dropped. But now people, I think, enjoy seeing a classical event, and then they enjoy seeing a different format, and they enjoy coming back to the first. So it's in a good place now and with good audiences.
Right. And do you ever see chess going the cricket way? Because, they've been through a similar struggle where Test cricket was something that was supposed to be something that only the traditionalists enjoy. The viewership for it was supposed to be dwindling. And now we see that it's suddenly making a resurgence of sorts where people had gravitated towards T20 are now also coming back to watching Test cricket. Do you think that this World Championship final kind of did that for classical chess?
Again, I think when you have an exciting test match, people will enjoy that. And it's the same here. When you have an exciting classical tournament, people will enjoy it as well. But it's true that audiences, in a way, it's not surprising. The same audience that wants everything fast-paced, suddenly wants to wait, I want to take a minute to understand this. And they want to slow it down as well. I think that's a very natural reaction in any sport. You get bored of the same thing over and over again. So this back and forth is interesting. In fact, for almost any sport, when it's played too fast, you might enjoy it once or twice, but then you want to again go over it slowly and back and forth. And this taste can be fickle. But I think right now it's a sort of equilibrium.
But do you also think that when the sport is too fast, it kind of becomes more of an entertainment than just sport, that players and even spectators, they don't actually have to apply their minds so much. They are just in the flow, and I don't know, maybe they are not, as I said, applying their mind too much.
My feeling is the 50th time if the pieces are dropping off the floor and somebody's flagging, you think, well, okay, that's not interesting anymore. Everything hits diminishing returns. At the same time, you take a year's break and you come back and people enjoy the same thing again. So probably that's more of a factor there.
And did you ever have that phase in your career where you hit the point of diminishing returns that you spoke of just now, where you told yourself that, maybe I need to take a pause from the sport, take a step back, reevaluate?
Very often I had this feeling that maybe I was getting sick of chess and you needed a break to clear my head. I would go a couple of weeks without looking at a chessboard and then come back for more. It wasn't format related as such, though. Again, when I did badly in one format, playing well in another format would rescue me, so to speak, and back and forth. But that's a very normal sensation for chess players, the ebb and flow.
So how did you get over it? What did you have to do to come back from that slump?
The longer slumps, you need a longer break. But sometimes it's just a couple of weeks not thinking about it, and then you wanted that hunger to return, and once it came, then
And do you remember what was the longest amount of time you've gone without looking at a chessboard in the middle of that slump?
Well, 2006, I had some very bad results in May, June, and then we went for a holiday for 2 weeks. No chessboard, no
That was
nothing.
Africa?
No, that was in South Africa.
Okay.
And then when I got back, I found that now I felt better and I continued. 2001 was the other example when I did really badly in Dortmund. I think more than a month I couldn't bear to even look at the game. And just every time you looked at the board, you start remembering the tough tournament. So I put it off. But even there, slowly, first the desire came back, then the result came back.
Right. A couple of quick ones before we end this conversation, Vishy. When we look back at this World Chess Championship match, say 5, 10, 15 years from now, do you think this world champion would be looked at as a world champion, a legit world champion, or will there always be an asterisk mark next to it?
No, I think it's just a world championship match like any other. There has never been this correlation between... it is a landmark movement because the last time this happened was 1972. Except Fischer withdrew from all chess, whereas Carlsen is only withdrawing from the specific title. In that sense, it is significant because it doesn't come that often. But in the end, the World Championship cycle has always been apart. It's been an endurance contest. How long, which has made the World Championship unique. It's something you qualified till the final stage and everything was dragged on and it had a rhythm all its own. And you can't have a world champion who doesn't want to play it. So that just makes sense.
Right. And the last one to conclude this, when you started off as a player, the world scenario, well, I was too young, but from whatever I've heard you recall stories and talk about it, it was the Cold War era, and you've spoken about how it impacted chess at that point. And now when you're starting off as an administrator, as the FIDE vice president, the world's kind of fall into a similar place once again. Does that make your job more challenging?
Okay, these are pretty sweeping things. In my junior days, the Cold War was still going on. Though by the time I was 16, the Cold War sort of ended because Gorbachev had come in, and it wasn't obvious then, but now it seems obvious that already by 85, they were winding down in a way. And by 91, the Soviet Union dissolved, all these countries. Then these players who couldn't travel freely suddenly could travel freely. They were everywhere in tournaments. And then you got completely used to this new situation. So the Russia-Ukraine war from last year is an anomaly. I mean, it's been 30 years without this. And then suddenly but it's been very tough on chess because Russia and Ukraine are quite deeply connected with chess. And so invariably, chess community has had to suffer a bit there. Besides the other implications, is that for chess, these were core countries. And so...
Yeah, it's a tightrope one walks, right, as an administrator of FIDE.
Yes, what FIDE has done is to ban the country, which is so Russia cannot compete with its own flag thing, but shield the players and essentially allow the players to keep competing. It's after all their livelihood. And most people in FIDE, and by the way, the IOC as well, are tending in this direction, which is that players' livelihoods and their individual situation shouldn't be caught up in this. Of course, the players have to be careful with what they say and speak. They'll have to represent a neutral flag, but they continue playing. It's a compromise, but that's where we are.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This week's show was edited and mixed by Abhishek Kumar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.